All right, wanted to say hello to everybody out there. This is a little bit of a different advocacy with Adam, as I am going to go through and do basically the same presentation I've been doing in lots of other places here lately with the Great Alaska Aviation Gathering and then at Valdez and then a couple of other pilot groups across the state. And so May has been a busy month for me and wanted to make sure we didn't skip out on a chance to update what's going on. I am still on the road as I'm recording this and wanted to make sure that we answer some questions that have been floating around, especially some of those that are out on social media. And so I thought it would be best to go ahead and just record the presentation that I've been giving in some places that I know a lot of people have seen already, but yet there seems to be a lot of folks that have not seen it. So here's a little bit of a look, a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about here in this presentation about the Anchorage Class Charlie airspace redesign. We've talked about this before in previous months about the need for this redesign, where we are in the process, and what's been going on with the ad hoc committee. We're going to talk a little bit more about those things. I'm going to give you some resources to go and get some more information and kind of give you an idea of what we anticipate the possible timeline to be for continuing in this process. So again, this is a presentation that I've given numerous times here in the recent weeks. One of the opportunities to present this was at the gathering with Jim McClay, who is also part of the ad hoc committee, but he is with AOPA out of the Washington, D.C. office, and Jim has been a great resource through all this stuff. And so actually, he was the one who took the picture there at the beginning and has helped a tremendous amount with all this information, getting it out there to you. So I want to make sure I credit him for his part and helping with getting the word out here recently. So let's go and look and see what the reason is for this proposal. You've heard me say these things before, but the Air Force has asked for a ILS to their north-south runway. They've been working on extending that runway to the north, and it's a reasonable request that they would be able to have an ILS approach to that runway 16. And so that's kind of started the ball rolling. There was a feasibility study that was done many, many years ago as to whether or not it would be feasible to put in an instrument approach, and they came back that basically says that it was a possibility. There was a lot of things that need to be addressed, but it would work. So the reason why they're asking for that expansion is to be able to better utilize the facilities there at JBER at Elmendorf, and to be able to have better options for recovering the fighters and then the heavy transport category aircraft, the C-17 and C-130s, back into Elmendorf. It's also a way to help alleviate some traffic flow concerns, because if you're familiar with the Anchorage airspace, you know that Anchorage International has 15 and the 7s is the primary arrival runways, depending on the winds. And over at Elmendorf, runway 6 was really the only runway that they could do some of those recoveries for an ILS. So if they were recovering on 15 at Anchorage International and then trying to recover on runway 6 at Elmendorf, those final approach courses cross each other, and that's a problem. And so this proposal will help alleviate some of that cross-final routes that make it difficult for controllers to time and sequence. There's also some concerns about the Part 93 airspace. Now, if you remember, Part 93 is basically what we do to come up with ways to fly safely when the situation doesn't fit into a standard cookie cutter type airspace. And so Anchorage is one of many places across the country that have Part 93 airspace. And to the FAA's credit, they're trying to do what they can to either eliminate Part 93 airspace by redesigning airspaces like they're talking about here in Anchorage, or modifying the existing rules to make it easier to operate in. So some of the other things that have come to light through this whole process that started evaluating the airspace change is there has been a significant number of what you see here listed as NEMACs, hatters, TCAS RAs, and ASAPs. So in aviation, we're nothing if we don't have acronyms. And so between 2014 and 2019, there were 44 near mid-air collisions, which generated hazardous air traffic reports for the military. And so you can imagine a near mid-air collision with a military aircraft. Being civilian or another military aircraft is not a good thing. But 500 C-17 traffic collision avoidance system resolution advisories have occurred in that same time frame. Now, a TCAS RA, if you're not familiar with that system, basically uses transponders to feed information into a computer on the aircraft, and then the two aircraft that are in conflict can kind of figure out what's going on and then issue a resolution advisory, which basically tells the pilot to climb or descend. And if you are given a TCAS resolution advisory in the cockpit of these larger aircraft, primarily 121 type aircraft or military aircraft, you follow that resolution advisory immediately, regardless of what your air traffic controller instructions were, regardless of what you see out the windscreen, you follow that resolution advisory. There have been 500 of those for the C-17s between 2014 and 2019. That number is unacceptable for a lot of different reasons. Now, they've done some digging. They know what's causing that. They know the problem areas. They know the hot spots. And so that's what is being addressed also in this Class Charlie redesign proposal. Those hazardous situations, those TCAS resolution advisories, is all part of the Air Force Safety Action Program, where they have some avenues for pilots to submit scenarios that they have encountered, and they can work through and try to fix those throughout that whole process. So if you want to know some more about the actual proposal and what's going on, that QR code right here on the screen will send you to an FAA document that will give you more details and more information about that. So what are the rules that dictate how we do this process? So the FAA has a Joint Order 7400.2P, that's the actual revision for that document, that dictates how they handle these airspace matters. Now, when we start going through chapters 14 and 16, it talks specifically about the Class Charlie modifications, and those are the rules that the FAA is having to follow right now for this process. It's a very formal process. It's a very rigid process, and we are in the very early stages of that process that are dictated in Joint Order 7400.2. We are at the ad hoc committee phase, and so there are two co-chairs, myself being one of them. Again, Adam White with the Alaska Airmen's Association. Alex Moss is also a co-chair. He is deputy director at Anchorage International Airport. And Alex is a great guy, very talented, and is doing an excellent job of writing up our recommendations and keeping records of what's been going on. And he runs a great meeting, by the way, Alex. So appreciate what you're doing there for our efforts. There's a great cross section of people that are part of that ad hoc committee. Now, it is not everybody in the public. That's not part of the process. It's made up of a cross section of the users of the airspace. That includes organizations like the Alaska Airmen's Association, like AOPA, the Department of Defense, the airport operators, the airlines, the cargo carriers, commercial operators, all those kinds of folks. And we have a very good cross-section in that committee. Flight schools are part of that. They were a little bit late to the game, but it's nice to have the flight schools involved through this process now. The FAA is also in the room, but the FAA is there as an advisory role only. They don't run the meeting. They are there to help the committee understand the proposal. They're there to gather data and information for the committee to be able to work through and fully comprehend and understand the proposal so that we can offer good recommendations back to the FAA about some of our concerns or ideas for ways to modify the airspace. So that's kind of where we are right now. Now, what does that look like in the big timeline of the whole process? So you can see there the where we are here arrow. We are in the ad hoc committee phase, and so we are working through that to come up with our recommendations. We hope to have those recommendations to the FAA relatively soon. We are finalizing that recommendation document right now. And the next step after that is we give that to the FAA. They work through our recommendations, and then we'll go into an informal airspace meetings that the FAA will host. There'll be public comment periods that you see marked out there in red. And then there's lots of other things that have to go through that whole process, but you can see that mapped out here as then we go to hopefully final charting is the goal for the FAA to do this in early of 2027. Now, when we look and see what we've done up till now, the ad hoc committee meets every 2 weeks. We've been looking through all the different avenues and layers and angles and all kinds of stuff to be able to understand the proposal that the FAA is presenting, understand their thought process behind that. We've offered some recommendations already that we've got documented in that official report that we're working on. And I'll tell you that the FAA has done a very good job of being there in the room and helping us get data that we need, and then going back proactively and working on some of the things we're talking about. They could wait until the very end and then address those concerns that we bring up, but they've chosen to work alongside of us through this process and try to figure out the best route to go with some of our recommendations. And I can tell you it's been a very good collaborative effort. The FAA, however, is being very careful to not dictate anything in the meetings, not direct the course of the meetings, but again, doing a very good job of making sure that at the end of this, that we have the best product that's available for the needs of the airspace. So one of the things that we asked for as a committee was to understand what the traffic is doing today and why it may need to change as far as the airspace. So you can see in this graphic here, there's some pink lines and some green lines, and you can see the dates of June 1st through June 15th of 2024. So that was last year, last summer. During that 2-week period, there were over 10,000 operations out of Lake Hood and Merrill. And so some of those also were off of Anchorage International, but those were the GA traffic, some of the VFR traffic that comes in and out of Anchorage International, which, as you see, is not very much considering the other traffic flows. So that gave us a pretty good idea where people were actually going and what was happening. Now you can see some yellow lines on there that look like airspace boundaries, and that's a little bit of a sneak peek preview of what the FAA was thinking as far as some expansions for us. But you can see that there's definitely some patterns that came to light where aircraft are flying. Some of that is because of the Part 93 airspace that's across Cook Inlet. Some of it's mainly because of the VFR procedures that have been developed to allow us to come and go from the Anchorage area. And so, again, this is the current Class Charlie airspace for the Anchorage area. You can see that there's also some green lines over here on this area on the right that depict the Class Deltas for Lake Hood, the Merrill segment, for Elmendorf, and for Bryant Army Airfield. Those are those green boundaries there to the northeast of the Anchorage Class Charlie. So that's what we're working with today. And because of the ILS that's been proposed and going to be going in most likely at Elmendorf to their north-south runway, there was also some other issues that came to light that would be better to streamline the flow in and out of Anchorage International, and possibly even adjust the glide slope for the ILS to 1.5 at Anchorage International. So there was a lot of other things that needed to be addressed coming into runway 7, 7 left and 7 right at International. Some of those international cargo carriers have been having trouble with stabilized approaches because of other traffic cutting across the final approach course, and they get a little nervous about that, and so they go around. And some other carriers don't do that as often, and so that's caused a little bit of a problem with how do they resequence and come back through and do all those things. So there was a need to adjust more than just accommodating an ILS to 1.6 at Elmendorf. So this graphic shows you what the FAA originally proposed for the modifications to the Class Charlie. Now, I say originally proposed because of the conversations that have occurred through the ad hoc process. There's been some back and forth. There's been some requests made by the committee that the FAA has said that they could look at and evaluate. And while they can't promise with 100% certainty what the outcome will be of that request that the committee makes, they do have an obligation that if there's no safety reason to not grant the request, that they need to do everything they can to try to accommodate it. So because of those conversations and because of what we know is already going to be in that recommendation document, I can tell you with a high level of certainty that what you see on your screen right now is not going to be what the Anchorage Class Charlie will look like throughout the end of this proposal. It's not going to be as big as this. Hopefully it won't be as complicated as this. And so you'll notice there's no altitudes given on these blocks because I don't want people to get in their mind locked in what was originally in the proposal versus what we think will be at the end of the proposal. The FAA, again, has been very responsive to our concerns as the ad hoc committee, which does include a broad spectrum of airspace users, not just general aviation. So the cargo carriers, UPS, FedEx, those folks, Cargolux, Atlas, they're all part of this conversation. Alaska Airlines was a part of it early on, and once they had reasonable assurance that their operations were going to be, be able to continue on without much changes in the negative, they haven't been participating as much, and that's fine. They were able to voice their concerns and get them registered and documented. So now here are some of our ongoing concerns that we are still working through because, again, this process is not complete. And so if you're familiar with the area and you know where Goose Bay is, there's still some questions about how will the traffic flow in the traffic pattern work when there's potential for Class Charlie airspace to be above it, and what will those altitudes look like. There's been a lot of conversations about where the flight schools are doing their ground reference maneuvers and their stalls and falls. If you're a flight instructor or have been receiving flight instruction in the recent past, you'll know what those mean. Where do we do that, and how does that play into the airspace and Class Charlie airspace specifically? So again, a big primary concern is how do we get access to and from the airports inside the Anchorage Bowl, and ADS-B requirements. How does that look like? Because remember, Class Charlie has some ADS-B requirements, which we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. Overall design complexity is also a concern for all of us. We want to make sure we design an airspace that works, but we also want an airspace that's not so complicated that people are afraid to take advantage of the opportunities that the airspace may afford them. Because if it's too complicated, people are going to either stick to what they were doing before, which may not be legal to do moving forward, or may not study it enough to avail themselves of some help from ATC. The big concern for the Alaska Airmen's Association is that while we are Part 91 General Aviation, is a heavy, heavy user of the airspace, that we don't get the short end of the stick to accommodate the military and the heavy cargo and passenger carriers coming in and out of Anchorage International. We understand their needs. We understand their request. We agree with their request on the big, broad scale, but we don't want to be the ones taking all the hits to accommodate those. So that's some of the ongoing concerns that we have. And I have great hopes that we'll be able to come to a position that we can all see the benefits of the new airspace as it comes out. That is not to say that there won't be changes. There will be changes to the airspace, and you're going to have to study up on some new procedures to come and go, that's for sure. So some interesting things came to light as part of this process that I want to make sure you're aware of. I talked about this in previous updates with you. People need to read and know and comprehend and understand and whatever other words I can come up with. But folks, we need to do a better job of understanding what FAR 91-225 means. That's where it talks about ADSB equipage and the areas that you have to be ADSB equipped. If you are inside the lateral boundaries of Class Charlie airspace and above Class Charlie airspace, you have to be ADSB equipped. What we found as part of our process of requesting data of the FAA and talking through what's happening today, there are a lot of people, almost 30% of the operations coming in and out of Lake Hood and Merrill Field are violating rule mandated airspace, meaning you are accepting a clearance or a Part 93 deviation that would get you into Class Charlie airspace, and you are not equipped with ADSB. So please read and comprehend and understand what the rules are. There was a letter to Airmen that was issued by the FAA to cover this and to educate you a little bit better. This QR code on the screen will take you to that letter to Airmen. I talked about this a lot last month. I need you to go read that and make sure you understand. Please also understand that if you ask for a Part 93 deviation crossing over Cook Inlet coming from Merrill and Lake Hood, that does not exempt you from ADSB equipage. Understand what that Part 93 deviation does. That only gives you a deviation from the altitudes that are depicted there. Okay, so that's a big issue. That's something that came to light during this process. You probably have already noticed that the ADIS at Lake Hood and at Merrill talks about some of these things already to kind of spur you to think about that. So please be careful. Just a reminder that if you're issued a clearance, who is responsible for knowing whether or not you can execute that clearance? It is you, the pilot in command, not ATC. ATC will give you a clearance. If you are not capable or equipped to fly that clearance, you are the one responsible to let them know that you are unable to execute the clearance you were given. And then you can negotiate and figure out with the controller what you can and can't do to be able to come and go from the airspace. So a little bit more about ADSB and some of the positions of the Alaska Airmen's Association. I know that a lot of folks have asked some questions on social media. I've tried to get on those threads and try to give some information here and there, but I am very hesitant to get into a huge knockdown, drag out discussion on social media. Those conversations do have a tendency sometimes to spiral, and I'm just not going to take the bait on some of those. But the Alaska Airmen's Association does not support ADSB out mandates beyond Class A, B, or C airspace. Now, what does that mean? That means those are the rules of today. They've been in effect for about 5 years. There's really no talk of making anything other than A, B, and C airspace rule mandated. Now, I say it that way because there are some conversations that folks are saying, hey, it would be really good if some of these Class Deltas had an ADSB requirement. But, those are just some some conversations that are kind of happening behind the scenes. But go on record that the Alaska Airmen's Association thinks that those three classes of airspace is where we should stop with a mandate for ADS-B. Now, what does that mean for encouraging you to equip? We're going to talk about more about that in just a second. So here's the problem that we run into when we talk about Class Charlie airspace, because there is a rule today for equipage. Now the airspace is going to change and it's going to expand. So that means that the areas that you are going to have ADS-B will increase. Now, we are working very hard, and the FAA is very understanding of our position, and we have offered some potential solutions, of which the FAA is evaluating, to see if we can still continue to get in and out of Merrill Field and Lake Hood, across Cook Inlet especially, and not have that be rule mandated airspace. I know there's some rumors floating around that you will not be able to get in and out of Merrill unless you're ADS-B equipped, because it's all going to be Class Charlie around it. Those are rumors. That is not in the design presently. That's not going to be in the final design. But what you need to know and understand is that even though we are asking for and we are advocating for avenues to get in and out of those two airports specifically, but some of the others around it, like Flying Crown and 6 Mile Lake and some of those others, that if you were to equip with ADS-B, you would have better options. You would have more options to come and go, and you would have better altitudes that you could fly because you would be equipped with ADS-B. And that's what the FAA means when they say, you see here the quote, best equipped equals best served. Meaning if you have more equipment, you can operate in the airspace that has more rules. And if you're willing to accept that clearance and you're equipped, then they can get you out at a different altitude to deconflict with other traffic. They can help by calling out traffic for you. They can reroute you and vector you around incoming traffic. But if you're not equipped, you may be forced to fly at a lower altitude than some of the other folks. And to be honest with you, you may have to wait a minute or two to allow another aircraft to be clear of the area. So while, again, we were trying really hard to find a way to get in and out of the airspace without an ADS-B requirement, it is strongly encouraged that you do equip with ADS-B. Now, I understand and I agree, and I am probably, I'll just go ahead and say it. I've been accused of being a conspiracy theorist on some things, and it's kind of a joke amongst a lot of my friends. And there are some very legitimate concerns when it comes to privacy with ADS-B. I know that cost is a serious issue for equipping with ADS-B, but there are options to equip that are not as expensive as some of the higher end versions. You know, for about $3,000, you can equip with an ADS-B solution if you already have a Mode C transponder. But if you want to do a full-on panel upgrade, well, now we're talking about multiple tens of thousands of dollars to do a full-on panel upgrade that would include an ADS-B solution. You don't need to do the big full-on panel upgrade just to be able to operate inside the Anchorage Class Charlie. You really only need to have that $2,500 to $3,000 option to be able to do that. Now, that's still significant money. I understand that probably more than you know. But when we look at aviation and you think $3,000, in light of some other things, it's not really a showstopper. The privacy concerns, however, are a very serious and legitimate issue for me. And in my role with the Airmen's Association, understanding that it's a big issue for you as well. I've talked about this in previous updates, but you can now go on the FAA website and have your personally identifiable information hidden from the FAA registry database. meaning your name and the address that the aircraft is registered to can be removed from the public side of that database. Please do that. Even if you don't think privacy is an issue and if you don't think it's that big of a deal, you probably don't want your name and address out there for the whole world to see when they just type in your IN number. There's no other activity that as Americans we would be okay with that. It's really no different than somebody typing in the tag number on your vehicle and knowing your name and where you live. Why is it okay that we are able to do that for aviation? So the FAA has an avenue to be able to remove that information from the registry. You can also participate in a private ICAO address program. That's a third-party call sign is another phrase that's used for that program. There's all kinds of ways to do that. I can talk to you more about that if you want to know more information, or you can just do a search for third-party call sign or the private ICAO address program and find out some more. Now that is limited only to the 1090 extended squitter solution for ADS-B. Now there's a lot of confusion out there about the anonymous mode for the 978 UAT solution. You know, you can go in and go into the settings on those 978 boxes and tell it to go into anonymous mode. That only works when you're squawking 1200. When you squawk 1200 with a 978 box, it does not broadcast your IN number. But as soon as you punch in a discrete squawk code, like you would be assigned from TRACON or approach and departure from Anchorage Class Charlie, your 978 box is no longer anonymous. It is now broadcasting your IN number. And if you still have your personally identifiable information associated with your database, the registry, the database there, folks will know who you are and they know where you live. And so, again, the privacy issues from that side of it are legitimate and real, but there are avenues in place to do that. The other issue with privacy that a lot of people have is they are concerned that the FAA will use ADS-B information for enforcement actions. The FAA is prohibited from using ADS-B data to initiate an investigation. That does not mean that they can't use ADS-B data in the course of an investigation. It's a very subtle difference, but it's helped us. We've made some grounds with that, and there's some possibility of that being expanded a little bit further and restricting that ADS-B data from enforcement actions. And so I understand people's concerns with that, and we are working to advocate ways to be able to limit that data being used in enforcement actions, but understand that the safety benefits for having that traffic data information in the cockpit is huge. If you fly with an iPad or some other solution that shows you the traffic, you know that it's very beneficial to have. It does allow ATC to give you better services for traffic separation and calling out other traffic along the way. So there's definitely some benefit for being equipped. But there are some legitimate concerns as well. But just so you know, the Alaska Airmen's Association, in partnership with a lot of other alphabet groups, are working tirelessly to improve that situation. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just wrap things up. And this has gone a little bit long, considering the normal that I do for these advocacy updates. But I wanted to make sure to get this presentation out there for you, because not everyone was able to attend the gathering. And those who were not able to make the gathering were not able to make it to Valdez last weekend, which was a great weekend. Had a fun time there. Great to visit with a lot of you at both locations. So wanted to record this presentation for you so you could actually have it, and it could be there on YouTube for the world to see. So yeah, there's my contact info there on that QR code on the right-hand side of your screen. The one kind of in the center is just a link to the YouTube channel where all of these are archived. So again, thank you for sitting through all this. And if you have any questions, my contact information will be in the description. You can scan that QR code there and get directly to me there as well. So with that, I'll say thanks for your attention and cooperation through this whole thing. And again, if you have questions, please reach out to me. Would love to walk you through some of your concerns and be able to offer you answers. And just know that you have not missed a public comment period yet. The earliest that those public comment periods would be coming around would be in the fall of this year, fall of 2025. And so be on the lookout for announcements for those public comment periods when we get to them.